So we'll now have our next speaker. The next speaker is Professor Z.Kohane from Harvard Medical School. Zach is the inaugural chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics and a professor of biomedical informatics at Harvard Medical School. He develops and applies computational techniques to address disease at multiple scales, from whole healthcare systems as living laboratories to functional genomics in neurodevelopment with a focus on autism. Zach's I2B2 project is currently deployed internationally to over 120 major academic health centers, where he drives discovery of methods in research in disease and pharmacovigilance, and some of this work contributed to creation of black box warnings that FDA puts on drug labels. On a more personal note, a few years ago, when we were just starting health work at Google, Harvard Medical School organized a special course for us. It was called Executive MD, and in 4 weeks, we went to Harvard and learned about what doctors learn in 20 years of medical education. Out of these 4 weeks, I had the privilege of being taught by Professor Kohane for a couple of hours. So about 1% of my medical education is due to Zach. So please welcome Professor Kohane.
So thank you to the program committee for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Last time I was at AAAI was in 1993, where we were talking about very old school symbolic techniques for trend detection. Let's see. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I have two comments about the talk that just preceded mine. First of all, on the behalf of all male mosquitoes, I want to protest the forcible separation from female mosquitoes. Second of all, I think you really heard what's at the crux of the current problem, which is the payment model. And so I'm going to give you a much more cynical discussion. I'm going to say what Vivian told you about is exactly what has to be fixed. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen if it doesn't get fixed, which in the near term seems likely to me, and how you personally can be very successful in helping humankind and be impactful in a variety of ways, including dollars. And if this is not your cup of tea, it's still going, it's my prediction for the overall system. So, first of all, something is happening in terms of excitement about artificial intelligence. This is from 1951 to the present, all the publications in AI in healthcare. And so there's a big spike happening recently, and that's could be because we're deluded about the impact. And I have to say, when I got my PhD in computer science in the 1980s, we thought we were going to solve, AI was going to solve healthcare's problems, and we were roughly wrong. And it became impolitic to use the word artificial intelligence for about 10 to 15 years after that. I have reason to believe that things are different now. So why are so many people excited? And where does the hype fall short? And where can we make a real difference in the near term? So you just heard about this paper where we were able to use, Google engineers were able to use a large corpus of retinal images to achieve expert performance in recognizing retinopathy. And there were a number of very interesting things to this result, including the fact that the only role of doctors in this whole paper was simply serving as labelers of the cases. That was it. That was their intellectual contribution. And so when I saw this paper, in fact, I wrote an editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association about this paper when it appeared. When it appeared, I called my very annoying cousin in Montreal, who's an ophthalmologist. I said, "Cuz, look what we have. We can now automatically recognize retinopathy. What do you feel about that?" And his reaction was, Zach, that's really interesting because I find looking at these retinograms extremely boring. And instead of looking at them, I'm glad to have a GPU, single GPU run it and for a few cents give me a reading. And instead, I'll go to the operating room, which I enjoy much more, and I get paid a lot more. So that it alerted me early on to a completely unintuitive result, that the use of this technology, at least in the developed world, might actually result in higher costs because you can actually, the surgeon can do the thing that's much more expensive than actually reading the retinograms. And so everybody who said, oh, we're gonna save costs, we're gonna cut costs, don't really understand what's going on in medicine. And what I hope to do today is to give you some better ideas. At the same time, it is true that the healthcare system is running a little bit scared about what AI might do to the healthcare system. And so our very august body, the American Academy of Medical Colleges, which is the association of all medical schools, was putting out articles like, will artificial intelligence replace doctors? But there actually might be a reason why they are worried, because we've heard this song before, and when we ignored it, it came to bite us. So when our illustrious leader here, Ashish Jha of Harvard University, published a paper a while ago saying that we needed to have a big investment in electronic health record systems, I, among many, cheered this notion. The problem was, now having nothing to do with Ashish, that when it came to actual implementation in 2009, I had initially been very happy with the Obama administration's investment in this area, led by one of our colleagues, David Blumenthal. But then when it became clear in 2009 they were going to implement technology that was state of the art, at best, for 1980. And by the way, it's not even a joke. I mean, it's funny, but it's not a joke. The technology that underlies EPIC, the leading vendor, is a language called MUMPS. Anybody have any idea what the M in MUMPS stands for? Massachusetts General Hospital. This was a real-time operating system that worked in 1966 with a B-tree-based hierarchical database and a real-time operating system on a PDP-10, I think. So that was great in 1966, but in 2009, it was not the right technology, and yet concrete was poured all over the existing healthcare system to the tune of $40 billion of investment by the federal government and many multiples of that by the private sector. And the problem was the technology was and is hard to use, and there was no real requirement, or at least no enforcement of the requirement for interoperability. And so we actually wrote an article in 2009 in the New England Journal of Medicine saying, why can't we actually have a health IT being more like an iPhone, where you have a modular architecture rather than the purposefully monolithic spaghetti code that underlies the system. And of course, the die was cast, and so many hospital systems, including the largest one in the Boston area, invested, think about it, $1.5 billion. Think about how many startups you could actually do in the space, and that's just one healthcare system's payment for this enterprise software. And this enterprise software has led, I thought that Vivian was kind in talking about the contributions to burnout. Because of the payment model, documentation is incredibly important to healthcare visits. And so doctors who are already squeezed for time, let's say 10, 15 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes are spent just hunting around screens and literally hitting thousands of buttons in order to have the patient encounter while they're trying to take care of the patient. So it doesn't feel to the doctor like they're helping the patient. They're not. They're helping billing. And the patient is looking at the doctor staying away from the encounter. And so it's a major contributor to burnout. And so I only raised that issue to explain why medicine might be fearful of a faultless implementation of technology. At the same time, we see real miracles, like the fact that artificial intelligence researchers keep redefining the boundary of what is artificial intelligence, and because of our human centrism, we then dismiss it as no longer being the realm of intelligence. But nonetheless, the fact that a reinforcement learning algorithm like AlphaZero could relearn all the rules of Go and then discard them on the way to world-dominating performance suggested, wow, maybe we could do that in medicine. Maybe we could have a reinforcement learning algorithm on medicine that could learn all the aspects of medicine and then discard the worthless heuristics and then go on to discover better ones. And is this the future of medicine? So I think it's very important in that context to remember a few important points that Andrej Karpathy, now at Tesla, has made about the properties of the problem domain, the task domain that AlphaZero has taken on so successfully that, well, what are those characteristics? A, it's a deterministic domain. Go is deterministic. It's fully observed. There are no hidden states in Go to discover. The action space is discrete. It's not continuous. You can have access to a perfect simulator, the game itself, so the effects of all actions are known. Each episode or game is relatively short. Evaluation is clear and allows a lot of trial and error experience. And there's huge data sets of human play. That is not true of physiology. None of those things are true of physiology. It's not discrete, it's not deterministic, it's mostly unobserved. The game is long, not short, evaluation is unclear, and there are not huge data sets of human play because even to the extent they exist, they're not widely shared. So all the big challenges in medicine don't have those properties for reinforcement learning discovery. So what area of medicine might succumb to reinforcement learning? Anybody take a wild guess about that? What? Give those two people the prize. They said billing and finance, and that is absolutely right. Because where is the game clearer? The game is clear in reinforcement learning in medicine around the rules, the discrete rules of payment, billing, and reimbursement. And so you can actually write rules to play that game and explore all possible games, and including how to deal with referrals of patient in and out of network. All those are not only implementable as reinforcement learning algorithms, but they're the biggest point of money in the whole 1/6 of the economy that is healthcare, which is that particular task is at the center of all the fights in medicine. How much I bill for something and how much I'm going to pay you of that bill for that service. That sounds incredibly cynical, and it is, but that is actually where the big dollars are. And the more hopeful side of this, at-will review and exploration of a doctor's decision advice and maximizing patient utilities are much less likely to result in sustainable business plans in the near term, especially because of the payment model that you just heard about. So with colleagues of mine at the Harvard Law School and one of my grad students, Sam Finlayson, we published this article in Science last year, I believe, where we showed that adversarial attacks on the very successful image-based diagnostic algorithms, whether it's looking at skin lesions for melanoma, or looking at x-rays for pneumonia, or looking at retinas for retinopathy, adding a little bit of noise that's so imperceptible that when you look at the image, after adding of that noise, it's actually not noise, it's purposefully generated, knowing what the convolutional neural network is actually doing. But adding this noise makes the picture look exactly the same to a human being, but flips the algorithm from saying there's a disease to not a disease. And you can adjust the noise so it's slight miss, or a near miss, or complete miss. And you can say, well, Zach, other than the bad guys, who would ever think of messing around with clinical data? Well, those of you who are not in medicine should know that in the basement of most large hospitals are teams of people whose only job is to look at the billing codes that are being generated, the diagnoses that are being generated by their doctors, and saying, what do I substitute to actually maximize income to the hospital? And so the adversarial attack of the hospital on the reimbursement algorithm in the payers happens every day, and every hospital is investing literally millions of dollars to play that game. So if you don't think that ML is going to be deployed very broadly as part of that game, whether from taking an ML algorithm for, let's say, melanoma and how big the lesion is, or the degree of retinopathy, that's a biomarker. It's a biomarker in the same sense as measuring a protein level in the blood can serve as an outcome in a trial. So if my algorithm just slightly shifts the outcome measured by 5%, so my trial for my billion-dollar drug is a slam dunk, if you think that's not going to happen, I don't think you're right. But there are plenty of green fields, and this is where I'm getting a little bit less cynical, where medical doctors would rather not tread. And those are the fields where I think we can have real impact today on patients. And as an example, I give you this one child who was fine until age 3, was walking, was talking, and then over a 6-month period had a significant decline, no longer walked, no longer talked, was referred to multiple top healthcare systems, top doctors, no diagnosis. He was then, He was then referred to the Undiagnosed Disease Network, which I have the privilege of being the principal investigator of the coordinating center of this network. And it will now seem very pedestrian to you, but when we first proposed this in 2012, it was a bit iconoclastic. I said, across this network of 12 academic health centers, coast to coast, we'll take all the genomic data of the patient and the clinical data, both identified, and put it into a FISMA, HIPAA-compliant cloud, in this case, the AWS cloud, and make it available to doctors wherever this patient goes. So we created this network, and so if patients were accepted into the network, they go in through the Harvard portal, they apply with a very simple application. If they're accepted, and there's about a 50% acceptance rate, genome gets sequenced, clinical data gets obtained, and this patient goes to the right doctor in the right institution who's expert in this area. And so, for example, in this case of this child, turns out that this child had a mutation in a gene called GTP cyclohydrolase 1, which you haven't heard of, but I hadn't heard of either. And before we get to it, let me explain to you the artificial intelligence or machine learning challenge here. We have millions of variants in our genomes, each one of us. Not only that, but we have, each one of us, dozens of variants that if you looked in a medical textbook today, is associated with disease, where clearly it's not. If you want to look up, by the way, a word that I created that I'm very proud of, it's called the incidentalome, the ohm of all incidental findings. That's part of the challenge we have. But when you come through that list of possible disease-generating mutations, sorting the list is a machine learning task where you have to use all sorts of other sources of knowledge to correctly prioritize which are the few mutations you're going to investigate and think hard about in order to be able to diagnose this patient. So this was the result of such a pipeline, working in conjunction with doctors who understand the disease. And it turns out this gene codes for a protein which is important in making neurotransmitters in your brain. And because this child had a mutation, he was making less and less of these. And so by giving him a cocktail of neurotransmitters right after that blockage, right after that loss of function, within a few months, this child was walking and talking again. And this is, remember, after having been seen by lots of doctors. And this is, by the way, a dollar issue. Colleagues from mine from United Healthcare tell me the cost of an average undiagnosed patient is $18,000 per month because they keep on going to the healthcare system and keep getting workups. And this slide is out of date, but we've seen well over 1,500 patients. We've made diagnoses for well over 400 patients, novel diagnoses. And although we're in our 8th year, we had a New England Journal paper where we summarized our success over the first 2 years. And I want to call out to you a few things. One is 1/3 of the applicants to our network already had a genome or exome. So merely having the measurement doesn't do the trick. They were still undiagnosed after their exome or genome was sequenced. The trick was the appropriate use of human intelligence and ML to actually focus correctly on the right variants. That makes the difference between able to make a definitive diagnosis and treat someone properly versus saying that they have a mutation or that they don't that is irrelevant and not helping the patient. And just so you can ask, in case you're asking, why do you know that you were more correct than other people? In addition to the fact that the patients responded when we thought they should respond, every single one of these mutations that were suspicious or questionable, we would use CRISPR, a gene editing technique, to knock in that mutation into a fruit fly or a zebrafish to see if it causes a significant phenotypic change. The other area where, so one area, there are many areas like that where doctors, the average doctor does not have competence. So areas like genomics is a great application domain where doctors don't think they have the expertise, and it's, I think, greenfield for us to use our techniques. The other area is where patient utilities, that is what they're trying to maximize, and dollars are aligned. Here's a great example. This is one patient, all the things that are being billed for, drugs and visits and procedures with inflammatory bowel disease. A bad thing, some of you may have it, and that requires a lot of treatments. Some of these treatments with monoclonal antibodies, for example, will cost easily a couple $100,000 a year. In fact, with a leading drug, Ashish would probably know this number better than I do, but the leading drug, Humira, I think is several $billion a year just for that one drug that's being used. So we asked ourselves, could we look at the healthcare system? Could we use at the healthcare system at all the data that's being generated for each of those patients and just predict those patients who will not respond to all those drugs and will ultimately have to have their colon removed. Because that's time that they're suffering, that's time that they are not able to work or go to school, and it's also time that the healthcare system is paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for the care. And to make a very long story short, we seem to have good results in predicting 6 months. If we have 6 months of a 6-month window prior to that, we can predict with decent accuracy, with AUCs of around 0.8 to 0.9, those individuals who will not respond to therapy and will ultimately have a colectomy within 6 months. In closing, I want to ask you, what is this graph of? Anybody have any idea? What? Flu? No. But thanks for A, being brave for answering, and second of all, for a plausible answer. No. What this is weight. And this was in response to my mother's situation where about 4.5 years ago, she had been admitted twice to the Brigham and Women's Hospital for heart failure, where the only reason she was in the hospital is because they needed to get fluid out of her body, and you had to have an intravenous diuretic called a Lasix. And I then did something that all the informatics literature has shown to be ineffective, but I was desperate, partly because, and mostly because I cared about my mom, and because she was suffering, and that she would die if she would get another admission to the hospital, but also because the Brigham and Women's Hospital is 100 meters away from my office, and when she was in the hospital, she expected me to be by her bedside, and so my ability to work was getting attacked. So then I did something that has been shown not to work in randomized controlled studies, which is to give the patient a scale and then to modify medications based on the scale. But I had no options because I already had purchased for her a concierge doctor who has 400 patients instead of 4,000, and he was not keeping her out of the hospital, and she had these big fat legs full of fluid, and it was not looking good. So I just got her a scale, and I'm trained as a pediatric endocrinologist in addition to the computer science, and so I'm a pediatrician, not an adult internist, and so my adult internist friends were horrified when I told them that what I was doing was I applied this very fancy machine learning algorithm that goes like this. If weight is greater than weight yesterday by 1 pound, add 1 additional pill of Lasix. That's it. And what happened was it worked. So she was going again and again to the hospital until I started this, and her legs became thinner and thinner, free of water, and she had many years after that completely free of the symptoms of heart failure. And so I wrote a tongue-in-cheek article for our local national public radio station called What My 90-Year-Old Mother Taught Me About the Future of AI in Healthcare. But here are really the lessons. One is, who completes the loop? Who is trusted? My mother, who, when she wants to use foul language, lapses into Russian, would not accept initially my recommendation to even get on the scale. So I had to harass her, get on the scale, get on the scale. I would look on this Fitbit scale, because it was through connected Wi-Fi, whether she'd gone it or not. Mom, get on the scale. Then, Mom, your weight went up. Please take an extra Lasix pill. And no, you didn't. You didn't take that Lasix pill, did you? Take the Lasix pill. And I got her to do it, and to the point that within a few months, it was autopilot. But I was checking in with her every day. Who integrates with the rest of the care? I was calling up her concierge doctor to make sure that he was tracking what was going on. I was tech support. If the scale lost its Wi-Fi, I was doing that. And who does the expert catch? What do I mean by that? So you heard my algorithm, which I should have published in AAAI. But then I saw this. Her weight was going down. I was saying, Zach, you're even better than you thought. You know, you had her on a stable weight, now her weight's going down. And then I realized I had done what all doctors do. Don't listen to your patients well enough. She had told me that she was getting up at night to pee and sometimes was having accidents, incontinent. And I know what I was thinking. I was thinking, it's terrible, she's getting old. Age sucks. And then I realized that something else was going on when I saw this. So I went to the CVS pharmacy and got what's called a test strip to dip in your urine, and sure enough, there was sugar in it. And she was getting diabetes, and she was peeing out the calories into her urine. And so I just gave her a pill of metformin, and everything stabilized, and she stopped peeing at night, and her weight stabilized. But think about all these things. The AI algorithm is just a very small part of it. All these other things have to happen in the real world for real patients to be helped. And so there are many tasks that can be done by that algorithm. But at the same time, I'm not talking about the medical connection, the human implementation question is absolutely central to the success here. And with that, I want to thank you and give you a free advertisement to a conference that we're holding in Bermuda this April, where we have major players from the big data companies, from the New England Journal of Medicine, talking about what an AI trial looks like, and where we have practitioners who actually have programs that have actually made it into the clinic will be talking. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, sir. In the interest of time, let us take one question from the audience, and we'll proceed to the panel.
Okay, one question. Go for it.
So what you said about revenue maximization sounds quite horrifying. So let's call that the attack. Then what's the defense?
Well, I heard utilization maximization.
So revenue maximization, right?
Yeah.
So let's call that the attack by the system.
I'm
Then what is
I'm
the
not parsing. Can someone parse this better for me?
Oh.
Thank you very much. Well, it goes back to the Vivian's question. Right now, the revenue attack on the system is true of all of healthcare. It's done by the drug companies, it's done by the hospitals, everybody. We're all trying to maximize our pull out of the dollar. The way to get those utilities of the system aligned with the patient is to go to value-based care, which is what Vivian was talking about. But that is extremely hard. And Ashish has shown how simple short-term measures that people can then game don't really contribute to improving the outcome or really improving the finances. What you have to have is a much more holistic approach to measuring how your population is doing. And although we're making some steps there, we're quite far from it. And so that explains why some very smart people, when they've heard me speak exactly on this topic, but in a different audience, have come to me and saying, I'm a VC. I think this area about gaming the system is where I want to invest my dollars. All right, thank you.
Thank you.